Hello, this is Sylvia Liska-Durrell again. I'm a founding member of the Hernando County Button Collectors Group, which is a subgroup of the Manatee Button Club in Ocala, Florida. The Hernando County Button Collectors Group is just a couple of years old, so many of us are still novices in button collecting. That is why we try to include a lot of education in our monthly meetings. I recently researched bone buttons and shared the info with my button group members. I hope you had a chance to see my parts 1 and 2 of bone buttons. In part 3, I'm going to cover collecting bone buttons, the last part of this series. As far as collectible bone buttons go, collectors seem to place a high premium on size, the larger the better, because only a small percentage measure large. Other sought-after features include raised rims, metal rims, bands or similar decorating that saves the button from being too plain. People like concave or square shapes, unusual placement of holes or number of holes, unusual shanks, and of course, elaborately carved bone. A few words about shanks. Self-shanks must not have worked out very well because while they do exist, that construction never became a standard. Metal shanks, on the other hand, were widely used from at least the early 19th century until the virtual disappearance of bone buttons from the market a generation ago. The repoussé button shown is also from the National Button Society photo library. The design of the metal top was created by hammering from the reverse side. It has a bone back. The great majority of fancy bone buttons now in collections date from the middle to late decades of the 19th century. The kinds popular with collectors include dyed bone. Old records mention coral red and turquoise blue, however, red is the color found today. Some are carved through the die to make a white design. These are often confused with vegetable ivory buttons decorated in the same way. Color stained by means of transfer. These buttons have a soft sheen, and one whole group of patterns reminds us of Oriental silk and Persian shawls. Other patterns have the simplicity and strong lines of stencils. Engraved bone buttons can have pigmented lines or a picture drawn with tinted engraved lines. The first of these is the simpler one. The incised lines are tinted in black, gilt, or other color. The second is made with an engraving tool and then hand-colored. Bone laminated and or inlaid. Most frequently, bone was used as a base for horn, pearl, celluloid, etc. Laminated bone buttons with a variety of patterns and shapes can be found, but bone inlay buttons are extremely scarce. Metal trim on bone buttons. This can include a few pin-shanked bone buttons that look like old gilt buttons, and others with open-work brass designs that either fit like caps or are attached to the pin shanks. Also, cut steel trim has been found on the sample card. Pearl-centered bone buttons. A little indentation is carved out to hold a pearl disc. Again, these can look like vegetable ivory. Unfortunately, counterfeiters can be at work here too. The plain pearl was sometimes replaced with a more impressive material such as silver or enamel. Again, be careful. Before I finish with some photos of interesting bone buttons, here are a couple of images of clothing with bone buttons that are in the Smithsonian Museum. First is a cotton corset with what is thought to be bone buttons. And from 1776, a blue wool jacket lined with linen and trimmed in red. It has silver civilian patterned buttons backed with bone and a silver lace on the buttonholes. These images can be found on the websites of the National Button Society, Western Regional Button Association, and the Smithsonian Museum. That concludes all three parts of my presentation on bone buttons. Look for more interesting information about buttons on the Hernando County Button Collectors Group's Facebook page. And be sure to join a local button club, state button society, and national button society to keep on learning about how to collect and preserve buttons.